attempt for man.
I'm on the moon. I'm on the moon. And the excitement, the wonder, the thrill, the adventure of it all.
What did an astronaut really see when he stood on the moon and looked back at Earth? Because what Charles Duke experienced up there changed how he saw life forever. Have you ever wondered what the moon actually feels like, not from Earth, but standing there in total silence? We have all seen the photos, but the real human experience is far more powerful. Today, we explore Apollo astronaut Charles Duke, what he saw, what he felt, and what stayed with him long after he returned. This is not about aliens or hidden bases. It is a real fact-based account, yet still hard to believe. Duke was a disciplined military pilot, but what he experienced on the moon left a lasting impact on him.
In Apollo, you're looking at the top of your helmet because it's like being in a fishbowl. So we didn't ever see the moon, the Earth from the moon.
If you enjoy space stories that make you think deeper, follow along and consider subscribing, because this one is not just about the moon. It is about what happens to a human being when they step outside the only world they have ever known. Who was Charles Duke? Charles Duke was not just any astronaut. He was one of the youngest men to ever walk on the moon, and his path to that moment was shaped by years of dedication, training, and an almost relentless drive to push beyond limits. Born in Charlotte, North Carolina, he grew up with a fascination for flight that would eventually take him far beyond anything he ever imagined as a child. He joined the Air Force after completing his education and quickly distinguished himself as a test pilot, a role that required both extreme technical skill and the ability to stay calm under pressure. His performance caught the attention of NASA during the intense years of the space race, and he was selected as part of the astronaut group in 1966. From that point on, his life was consumed by preparation for a journey that very few humans would ever take.
I'm astronaut Charlie Duke. I was lunar module pilot on Apollo 16.
Duke first made history during Apollo 11, serving as the capsule communicator on the ground, the voice that guided Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin through their historic landing.
You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
But his most transformative moment came later when he got his own chance to leave Earth behind. That mission was Apollo 16, and it would change his life in ways no one expected. The journey to the moon. The Apollo missions were not simple flights. They were among the most complex human undertakings ever attempted, involving thousands of engineers, scientists, and support staff working in perfect coordination. Every system had to function flawlessly, and every member of the crew had to be prepared for an almost infinite number of possible problems along the way. When Duke launched toward the moon as part of the Apollo 16 crew alongside John Young and Ken Mattingly, he was stepping into a carefully planned operation with a clear scientific goal. The mission was designed to explore the Descartes Highlands, a region of the lunar surface that scientists believed could reveal clues about the moon's volcanic history. The launch itself was a thunderous, overwhelming experience, but once the spacecraft was in the quiet of deep space, everything shifted. The journey took days. Inside the spacecraft, everything was controlled and precise, each action timed and monitored. Outside, there was only endless black space stretching in every direction, broken only by the overwhelming brightness of the sun and the slow-growing shape of the moon in the window. As that gray surface grew larger and more real, the weight of what was about to happen became impossible to ignore. This was not a simulation anymore. This was history in motion. First steps on the lunar surface. When Duke stepped onto the moon, the first thing he noticed was the ground. It was soft, dusty, and unlike anything he had ever encountered on Earth. The surface looked solid from a distance, but each footstep sank in and left a sharp, clean imprint that would remain undisturbed for millions of years in the absence of any wind or weather. Movement felt strange in a way that was both thrilling and deeply disorienting. Gravity on the moon is only about 1/6 of what it is on Earth, which meant that every motion had to be carefully controlled to avoid bouncing too high or losing balance. Duke later described the sensation as somewhere between floating and walking.
In Apollo, you're looking at the top of your helmet because it's like being in a fishbowl. So we didn't ever see the moon, the Earth from the moon.
A feeling that took time to adapt to, even for someone as well trained as he was. There was no wind, no sound, Only the faint mechanical hum inside his pressurized suit and the occasional crackle of radio communication with the crew and with mission control back on Earth. That silence was something he would never forget, a profound, unbroken quiet that pressed in from every direction and made even the smallest sounds inside the suit feel magnified. Standing there, in that stillness, he was more alone and more connected to the universe than he had ever been. The view that changed everything. One of the most powerful moments of the entire mission came when Duke paused, turned, and looked up at Earth hanging in the black sky above the moon. From that distance, Earth is small, roughly the size of a marble held at arm's length, but it blazes with a vivid blue and white light that is impossible to look away from. It is the brightest and most colorful thing in an otherwise stark and colorless landscape. What struck Duke most was not just how beautiful Earth looked, but how fragile and complete it appeared all at once. There are no borders visible from the moon. There are no signs of the conflicts, divisions, and tensions that consume so much human attention and energy. There is only a single, silent sphere, wrapped in swirling clouds, suspended in infinite darkness without anything holding it up. Duke later described how this view changed his understanding of what life actually means. It made everything on Earth feel connected in a way that is almost impossible to articulate from the surface. It made problems that had once seemed enormous feel smaller, and it made the things that truly matter feel clearer. This was not just a visual moment. It was deeply emotional, a shift in perspective that no amount of reading or studying could have produced. Total silence and isolation. The moon is quiet in a way that is almost impossible for most people to imagine. On Earth, even in the most remote wilderness, there is always some ambient sound, wind through trees, water moving, insects, or the distant hum of human activity. On the moon, there is nothing. No atmosphere means no sound can travel. And the silence is absolute in a way that has no earthly equivalent. Duke described the environment as simultaneously peaceful and intensely confronting. When he looked around, there was nothing but ancient rocks, gray dust, and the vast black sky pressing down from every angle. The landscape had not changed in billions of years and would not change for billions more. It was a place completely outside the reach of human history, culture, or memory. This kind of isolation has a way of stripping away everything that is not essential. It forces a person to confront thoughts and feelings that the noise and busyness of everyday life usually keep buried. Duke has spoken about how the silence gave him a clarity that he had never experienced before, a kind of internal stillness that matched the stillness around him. Few places on Earth, no matter how remote, could ever produce that kind of effect. What he actually did there. The mission was not just about walking around and taking in the scenery. Apollo 16 was a serious scientific expedition, and Duke and his crew had a packed schedule of tasks from the moment they landed. Every hour on the surface was planned in advance with specific objectives, time limits, and contingencies built into each phase of the mission. Duke and Mission Commander John Young collected rock and soil samples from multiple sites across the highlands, carefully labeling and storing each one for analysis back on Earth. They set up scientific instruments designed to measure seismic activity, heat flow from the lunar interior, and the properties of the solar wind. They also deployed a large ultraviolet telescope, making Apollo 16 the first mission to conduct astronomical observations from the lunar surface. To cover more ground than any previous crew, they drove a lunar rover.
54 years ago, NASA astronauts took their first drive on the moon, and now the space agency is shopping for a new ride as part of the Artemis program.
A four-wheeled electric vehicle that allowed them to travel several kilometers from the landing site. The rover expanded the scientific reach of the mission dramatically, letting them explore craters and geological formations that would have been unreachable on foot. Every action was planned, timed, and monitored from Earth, and in that sense, Duke and Young were scientists as much as they were explorers, working carefully through a checklist even as they stood on another world. Leaving a personal mark. Among all the scientific tasks and mission objectives, one of the most purely human moments of the entire Apollo 16 mission came when Duke chose to leave something personal behind on the moon. Before the mission, he had placed a photograph of his family inside a plastic sleeve, tucked it into his suit, and carried it all the way to the lunar surface. At the right moment, he took it out and gently set it down on the gray dust. The photo showed Duke, his wife Dorothy, and their 2 young sons, all smiling together in a moment of ordinary family life.
One of the last acts I did during our 3-day stay on the moon was to reach into my spacesuit pocket and take that picture and drop it onto the moon.
That now stood in the most extraordinary place imaginable. It was a simple gesture, but one that carried enormous emotional weight. He wanted some trace of his life, of the people who meant the most to him, to remain on the moon even after he was gone. That photograph is still there today. It sits on the surface of the Descartes Highlands, exposed to the extreme temperatures and radiation of the lunar environment, slowly fading but never moving. It is not a monument or a scientific instrument. It is just a family picture, left behind by a man who wanted to connect the 2 most important things in his life: the wonder of space exploration and the love of the people waiting for him back home. It is one of the quietest and most touching artifacts of the entire space program. Did he see anything unexplained? Now, this is where curiosity often grows loudest. Many people who follow space history wonder whether astronauts like Duke ever encountered something mysterious during their time on the moon, something that did not fit the official story or that has never been fully explained. It is a natural question given the sheer strangeness of the environment and the limited information available to the public about what happened during each mission. In Duke's case, there is no verified evidence that he encountered anything that could be described as alien structures, unidentified craft, or unexplained phenomena. His accounts of the mission have remained consistent over decades of interviews and public appearances, and NASA records align with his personal recollections. He has never claimed to have seen or experienced anything that contradicts the official documentation of the mission. However, the lunar environment itself is profoundly disorienting in ways that can affect perception. Shadows on the moon are exceptionally sharp and dark because there is no atmosphere to scatter light. The contrast between sunlit areas and shadow is extreme, and the complete absence of familiar reference points like trees, buildings, or human-scale objects makes distances and sizes very difficult to judge. These visual conditions can sometimes cause people unfamiliar with the lunar environment to misinterpret ordinary geological features. What looks mysterious in a photograph may simply be a rock, casting an unusual shadow in the unfiltered sunlight of another world. The power of perspective. What truly and permanently changed for Charles Duke was not any physical discovery he made on the surface. It was not a rock sample or a scientific reading or an unexpected feature of the landscape. It was something far less tangible and far more lasting, a fundamental shift in the way he understood his own life and the world he had come from. Seeing Earth from the moon gave Duke a perspective that almost no human being in history has ever had access to. From that distance, the planet that holds every human being who has ever lived, every war ever fought, every civilization ever built, appears small enough to cover with your thumb. That visual reality carries an emotional weight that cannot be fully prepared for, no matter how much training a person has completed. Many astronauts throughout the history of space exploration have reported similar experiences after returning from missions, and researchers have given this phenomenon a name. It is called the overview effect, a cognitive shift in awareness that arises from seeing Earth from space and recognizing the planet as a single, fragile, interconnected system. For Duke, the experience was not abstract. It was immediate and visceral, a feeling of unity and responsibility that he carried with him for the rest of his life. It was not a theory. It was something he lived. Returning to Earth. Coming back to Earth was not simply a matter of landing and picking up where he had left off. After spending days in the silence and vastness of space, the return to a world full of noise, movement, color, and constant human activity was jarring in ways that were difficult to fully explain to anyone who had not experienced it. The transition was both physical and emotional, and it took time to process. Duke splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on April 27, 1972, completing a mission that had lasted just over 11 days. The physical readjustment to Earth's gravity was relatively quick for someone in peak physical condition, but the internal adjustment took far longer. The world he had returned to was the same world he had left, but he was no longer the same person who had left it. Small things that had once seemed important now felt trivial. Large things that had once seemed overwhelming now felt manageable. The experience of having stood on another world and looked back at this one had permanently recalibrated his sense of what matters and what does not. Duke returned to his family, to his work, and to ordinary life, but he carried the moon with him in a way that never entirely faded. The silence of that gray landscape stayed somewhere inside him long after the noise of the world closed back in around him. His life after Apollo. After leaving NASA, Duke moved into a different phase of life that took him in directions very few people expected. He transitioned into the business world and had a successful career in various commercial ventures, but the most significant change in his life during this period was not professional, it was deeply personal. In the years following Apollo 16, Duke went through a period of searching that led him toward a profound shift in his spiritual beliefs. He has spoken openly in many interviews and public appearances about how this transformation affected him, describing it as the most important journey he ever took, more significant in some ways even than the journey to the moon. He became deeply committed to his faith and began sharing his story with audiences around the world, not just as a story about space, but as a story about meaning, purpose, and personal change. Today, Duke is recognized not only as one of 12 human beings who walked on the moon, but also as a compelling storyteller who uses his extraordinary experience to speak about gratitude, perspective, and the things that give life its deepest value. His story resonates with people not because they can relate to going to the moon, but because they can relate to the feeling of having their entire understanding of life rearranged by a single transformative experience. That is the part of his journey that travels across any background, any culture, and any generation. What science learned from Apollo 16. The scientific legacy of Apollo 16 is substantial and continues to inform research today. The mission was specifically designed to explore the lunar highlands, a region of the moon that is geologically distinct from the darker basaltic plains that earlier missions had studied. Scientists hoped that the highland samples would help fill in gaps in the understanding of how the moon formed and how its surface had evolved over billions of years. The rock samples collected by Duke and Young turned out to be older than those brought back by earlier Apollo missions, some dating back more than 4 billion years. These ancient materials provided a window into the earliest history of the solar system, a period so remote that almost no direct geological evidence of it survives on Earth. Analyzing the samples helped scientists refine their models of the moon's formation and its relationship to Earth's own early history. Beyond the sample collection, the scientific instruments left on the surface continued to transmit data after the crew departed. The seismic sensors, heat flow probes, and solar wind detectors all contributed to a growing picture of the moon as a complex and geologically active body rather than a simple inert rock. The ultraviolet telescope operated by the crew during the mission produced astronomical observations that would have been impossible from Earth, demonstrating that the moon could serve as a platform for science as well as a destination. The mission proved that even a landscape that looks completely empty has secrets buried beneath its surface. Why people still question the moon missions. Even more than 50 years after Apollo 16, a persistent segment of the public continues to question whether the moon landings actually happened. These claims have been examined and addressed thoroughly by scientists, historians, and independent investigators across many decades. The evidence supporting the reality of the missions is extensive, consistent, and has been verified by sources completely independent of NASA, including tracking data collected by observatories in other countries during the missions themselves. The rock samples returned by the Apollo missions are perhaps the most compelling physical evidence of all. They have been studied by scientists all over the world and have properties that cannot be replicated by any rock formation found on Earth. Countries that were rivals of the United States during the space race, including the Soviet Union, tracked the Apollo missions in real time and never disputed their authenticity, which is perhaps the most telling fact of all. If a rival superpower with every motivation to expose a hoax found no evidence of one, the evidence for authenticity is about as strong as historical evidence can ever be. Astronauts like Duke have addressed these claims patiently and consistently over the decades, sharing accounts that have never wavered in their essential details. Duke has also noted the emotional reality of the experience, the specific sensations, fears, and moments of wonder that could not be fabricated from a soundstage. While speculation will likely always exist around extraordinary events, the scientific consensus is unambiguous. The The missions were real, well documented, and among the most thoroughly verified achievements in human history. The human side of space travel. Space missions are so often discussed in terms of their technology that the human beings at the center of them can sometimes fade into the background. The spacecraft, the trajectories, the instruments, and the engineering achievements dominate the headlines, while the interior lives of the people sitting inside those machines receive far less attention. But the human experience of space travel is just as real and just as important as any piece of hardware. Duke's story is a reminder that astronauts are not machines. They feel fear before launch, wonder when they see the stars from outside the atmosphere, grief at being separated from their families, and joy at moments of discovery that no training could have fully prepared them for. These emotions do not diminish the professionalism of the people who go to space. They are part of what makes the achievement meaningful. The psychological and emotional dimensions of spaceflight have become increasingly recognized as important factors in mission planning and astronaut well-being, particularly as longer missions to more distant destinations are being considered. Duke's experience and the experience of others who have spoken about the overview effect and the emotional aftermath of spaceflight has contributed to a growing understanding that sending human beings into space is not just an engineering challenge. It is a profoundly human undertaking, and the people who do it come back changed in ways that go far beyond anything a debrief or a medical examination can fully capture. What his experience means today. Today, space exploration is entering one of its most exciting and unpredictable phases. Private companies are developing new launch vehicles and planning crewed missions to the moon and beyond. Space agencies around the world are collaborating on permanent lunar infrastructure. A new generation of astronauts is preparing to stand where Charles Duke once stood and look up at the same Earth he saw hanging in that black sky. In all of this activity, Duke's experience remains deeply relevant. It is a reminder that the most important thing any of these missions can produce is not a soil sample or a technical data set, but a shift in human perspective. When people go to the moon and look back at Earth, they return with something that no textbook can teach and no simulation can replicate. They return with a felt understanding of how small and precious and singular this planet is. As new missions push further into the solar system, the lessons that Duke and others like him have shared become more important rather than less. The overview effect is not a side effect of space travel. It may be one of its most valuable outcomes. In a world that often feels divided and fragmented, the experience of seeing Earth from the outside and recognizing it as one whole, connected living system is perhaps exactly the kind of perspective that the next chapter of human exploration should carry with it. Charles Duke did not return from the moon with secrets or hidden discoveries. What he brought back was perspective, emotion, and a deeper understanding of Earth's place in the universe. His experience shows that sometimes the biggest change does not come from what you find, but from how you see what was always there. What do you think matters more, discovering new worlds or understanding the one we already live on? Subscribe for more real stories that change how you see the world.